You're the last ones?
Well, you're not the last ones. You're the last ones today. Yeah. So because we are in a busy day, we're just going to try to keep it to 45 minutes, which will
Even better.
fly through our answers and
that
our
sounds great.
questions, but that will keep us all organized today.
Yeah.
Great.
So thanks for being here.
Yeah.
We'll just start and have you guys introduce yourselves and say what you're running or why you're running.
Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, you go first.
Okay.
Ladies first.
So my name's Shimiko Montgomery. I'm running for a variety of reasons. I think the two main reasons that keep sticking out in my mind is that right now there are currently 12% of our ninth graders aren't on track to graduate. It's statistics like that stick in my mind. Also, there's greater achievement gaps for students of color and students who come from low-income families. I work as a pastor for Justice and Mission at Ben First Presbyterian, and I work a lot with marginalized and vulnerable communities, especially our growing Latinx community, and families living in poverty, and I see what that looks like every day. I believe that no student's potential to succeed should be impacted by factors that they cannot help. I believe it's time that we face the inequities in our society, especially when they get translated into our public schools. I've worked also as a school counselor at the elementary and high school levels. I know what policies look like in the classroom. I know what good policies look like and bad policies. I know what the impact. Of student support looks like on the student, on the classroom, on the educator, and on their families. And I believe that my classroom and counseling experience would be an asset to our board. And I think when you weave in these two sets of experiences, my experience working in this community with vulnerable populations and the community service organizations that serve them in addressing the barriers that they face, as well as finding solutions to solve them, combined with my experience as a school counselor and providing student support to increase academic achievement, I think these two experiences woven together would make me a great candidate for our school board, and that's why I'm running.
Great. You know what? I just remembered our publisher wanted to phone in on this one. He's on the road. And so I
Aaron?
apologize.
Yeah.
Aaron's
No.
gonna.
I have not talked to Aaron in a while,
I'm gonna
so
call
it'll be
him.
good.
He's just gonna be listening in so that he doesn't have to watch the whole video.
It's interesting that as it gets hotter, because it's so dry here, like you forget how much you need to hydrate.
Yeah.
I feel like these past couple days have been.
Yeah, it does.
This room gets really warm too. So.
Steely hands and everything.
Yes, yeah.
Hi Aaron, it's your staff, and we're here with Andy and Shimiko.
Hello.
Aaron.
Hi, thanks for patching me in, I really appreciate it.
Yep. So
Oh.
Shimiko already did her intro, and then Andy's gonna tell us why he's running now.
Great. Well, first off, thanks for having me. This has been, definitely up and down time, as I know Shimiko can talk about it. A couple things. I've been on the school board six years this July. Few things that I came in when I took over Beth Bagley's seat that I was focused on. Communication to parents, especially at the middle and high school levels, is an area that we deeply lack in the district. And we're improving, but there's a huge gap for whatever reason, and I even noticed this with myself and my son, who's a 7th grader. It's really easy to be involved when you have one teacher at that elementary school level every day, and you're in there. And then when they kind of get into 6, 7 periods, you're like, okay, which teacher? So I think communication to parents was one piece that I was frustrated when I came on. I want to continue that. We've gotten better. But I think it's easy to go back and go, well, social media, we posted it on Facebook, right? And not everyone has access to that. Or I don't know about you all, but Facebook seems to only show me certain things and not everything. And so oftentimes you're seeing about 2 or 3 days later. But the biggest thing for me has been career and technical education. When I started 6 years ago talking about it, it was a very small piece in our district. Having worked for the Builders Association, we are already seeing the gaps in employment because so many people were getting retrained, which was, because of the Great Recession, it provided a lot of opportunity for people to go get retrained and go to college. But what we didn't realize is that we were having a mass exodus of good people, good family wage jobs for the workforce. And what I think we can continue to do is teach the basics, shop, automotive, that sort of thing, to kind of keep it simple. It's much more than that now, but if you haven't been to Lapine or the new Marshall shop and what's going to go on in the new high school, it's really exciting to let people know that they don't necessarily have to go to college. When we first started, Governor Kitzhoffer was pushing the 40-40-20, 40% go to college, 40% master's degree, and I think 20%. There was no talk 6-10 years ago about career and technical education. It kind of got forgotten. And I think the focus for me is to let people, and we need to celebrate those that maybe choose not to go to college, but choose a path of a plumber or electrician, because those are long-term, those are really good paths, and steady jobs that we're all gonna need. So those are my two basics why I want to continue. I'm sure we'll go into a lot more of what else I want to talk about.
Yeah, so since I know you've done this before with us, you guys both have an opportunity to, answer our questions, and if you have any follow-ups after, you're welcome to follow up to your opponent's response. And we like to start with just a really basic question. What do you believe the role of a school board is, and how do you believe you'll fit into that? So either one of you can start.
I can go first this time.
Okay.
So about 3 years ago, we restructured how our board was set up. We used to have somewhere close to 300 policies that we had to monitor on an annual basis. And a lot of times it's state law says you need to have a policy on X. Well, we support following the state law and those policies. So what we did is we switched to a new model called Carver's governance. And really what that does is we set the board ends. And I think really that's, at the end of the day, I support that. And that's what the board's role is to get with the superintendent and the team and tell them where we want where we need to grow and what we need to close on. And in that, we can constrain or close as much as we want. For example, we have a policy that the superintendent is required to have a succession plan. Not a lot of debate. If Shay were to have major surgery for unforeseen reason, then he has a list of succession. We have another policy on sites and facilities that's much more constrained. For whatever reason, we decided to keep the naming rights of schools and not hand that off to a team. So I believe the board's role is to oversee and create the ends and the goals, but at the end of the day, let the team, the higher professionals, do what they do best and not dictate the exact path to go down. Just get to the goal. A lot of us can get to the same end, we just get there in a very different way many times.
Okay, great.
My answer is pretty simple. We envision the educational future for our community. We set goals and we define outcomes. Like Andy says, I think the less effective school boards are the ones that really dive into the operational side of things, really sticking with setting vision and policy and overseeing those, and overseeing the budget are your critical pieces.
I'm so curious about this because we've talked about this with a lot of different board candidates, both school board and just in the COCC one just before this. And people definitely have different perspectives on this. And I guess I'm curious how you set goals without knowing what the steps would be to execute those goals. I mean, you know what the end goal is, but if you don't really dive into the meat of that, how do you know it's achievable?
Well, I think for me, we dive into that and we listen to them. Mm-hmm. One thing that always stuck to me when we were interviewing for superintendent, when I went through that process when Ron retired, was education's funny because we're all experts in education because we went through it. Mm-hmm. And that really stuck with me during that interview process, and that's where I kind of fundamentally changed how I looked at some of those policies. Like, okay, how do we get there? We get with the team and talk about, okay, here's where we like graduations rates to increase by 5% in the next 5 years, let's say, to make up. So, okay, how are we gonna get there? If we pose that to you, the team come to us how you're gonna get there and show us that plan. We may think it's the right or wrong way to get there, but I believe that the educators know the best way. Education is so fluid and changing so rapidly that how is me as a person that owns a small business sit there and go, well, this is the best way to education. Back in my day, we did it this way. That really fundamentally changed how I look at it. I really trust the teachers, the superintendent, and those people to get to the end goal. And then also to be realistic with the board, to have the pushback going, yeah, Andy, 20% graduation rate in 1 year, not likely to gonna happen. I'm just using that as an example. Obviously, we hope it would happen, but that's how I see it. Hopefully that answers what I'm thinking.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's important that part of the role of the board is to hire the superintendent. So really trusting the superintendent in his role in carrying out in achieving these goals is really important. But in getting, I'm losing my train of thought here. Oh my gosh, repeat your question.
So
he started
just
talking and I had a thought and then I was like, great, no, I've lost it.
Kind of a convoluted question too. It's
No,
just
keep going.
how do you vision the end goal without understanding the middle part of how those things are executed?
Well, I think trusting
Also,
that
we're busy. Please try your call again later. Announcement 8, switch 3.
Do you want to call it back?
Dash 3.
Sorry guys. This is
All
That's all right.
circuits are busy. Please.
Must have went by Newberry Station there. That's where I
He's
always
driving
drive.
to California right now.
there's a
How's
lot
he on
of
97?
pockets of.
Yeah,
If he's on 97, there's a ton of them.
he might be off 97 by now, but
I was noticing it hadn't made noise for a while. As you could hear kind of scratchy. It's
Somebody just had us on mute.
probably just.
Or we put them asleep, one or the other.
this is our tactic to see how you do under pressure. Disruptions. Still recording, yay. Alright, well, he'll call me if he.
So your
Good
question has multiple. There's a variety of ways to go about it, and you're right. It's a bigger question. It's hard to know which way to go about it. So yeah, I think my first thought was correct in trusting the superintendent to know how to achieve those goals. But also, it's not like we're going into it with a completely blank slate. It's not like, well, now you have to set all the goals that we have for our K through 12 right now. We already have the ends in place. We already have a foundation there. So it's continuing that work. And then we have a ton of data that tells where our schools are at, how we're achieving those ends already. So we're not walking into it. So when we set a goal, it's not just this, well, now I think all of a sudden we should do that. I mean, the data is pointing to certain directions so that we're constantly assessing and improving. So we're not. It's not ever a blind shot in the dark. Yeah, I know the question's kind of hard to answer. So.
Yeah, I was going to fill in there. I think Shimiko hit it right there. I think oftentimes we already know where the failings are when you're setting goals. It's not like it's a blank slate. Oftentimes we know, hey, we're failing in X. We need to improve this area. So I think we've dug into some of that middle part. Obviously, the path to get there is what we're going to trust the team to do. Is what I'm saying.
Yes, like you were saying that there's experts that we hire and committees that we put in place to oversee these things. So it's not. Yes, yeah.
We're on the same
we
page.
can keep talking
Great.
about it.
Well, I mean, you touched on it already in your intro, but, increasingly having a more diverse population in Central Oregon has, brought up new issues, I think, over the last few years. So this seems like, yes, it's not something new, but something of more importance to the school board now. So what would be, and I'll direct this to you first because you brought it up, what would be, what are your approaches to addressing the achievement gap, and then also just the softer, just day-to-day interactions for students of color in the community that are feeling not supported?
Absolutely. Well, I think the two main things that we see in our schools right now are funding related. We see class sizes that are getting too large, and we see a lack of the ability of our schools to provide student support. So like school counselors, various interventions, mental health supports, all of this impacts the entire school population. So especially when a student is struggling for a variety of factors. So maybe they have issues at home, or they have, or they're struggling academically. It tends to be the students who don't have that extra support outside of the schools that tend to not be able to succeed as much. And we see that in our data. So finding ways that we can do targeted interventions would be wonderful. I mean, there's definitely school-wide interventions that we can do. But these targeted interventions are really important, especially with the students who are struggling. So increasing those social, emotional supports, increasing mental health supports. But of course, all of these things cost money. So I think part of the question is how do we improve funding? Because I think nobody in the district is going, well, good grief, I don't know how to make these improvements. I think we all agree that funding is the critical issue. Class sizes, lack of student support are the two main things. So I think solving those two things would make a big impact. But then there's also things that we can do that don't cost a lot of money. So creating a culture of care in our schools. Training teachers and students about inclusivity. Things like that don't cost a lot of money and make a big impact on how a student feels welcome. Building relationships between students and educators, students and the staff, so that they know that they have someone they have someone to trust in the schools. All of these things impact a student's success on a school-wide basis, if you're going to talk about school-wide interventions rather than just targeted interventions.
Mm-hmm. How does a board member play into those things that are happening right in the schools that you're just discussing?
Well, those become more operational at that point, but I think creating an intentional focus to say this is important. We do have these populations that are lagging behind. So how do we create an intentional focus to say this is important? If we set policies to say we need to improve the achievement gap with these populations, what are the barriers that these populations face? I think engaging these populations as much as possible in the solutions is incredibly important. That's something that I do in my work a lot. Getting to know these communities. What are the issues that you face? Is it transportation? Do you need extra classes to learn English so that the parents can speak English and access their schools and be able to volunteer and participate? What exactly are the issues that these families face? Is it do we have because for example, I used to be on the board of the Homeless Leadership Coalition. They do the point-in-time count every year. One number that is always inaccurate is students who are experiencing homelessness. Mainly because parents don't want to sign up for the point-in-time count, because then you say who you are, who your children are, that you aren't providing a safe and stable housing for them. Of course, it creates the fear that they're going to have their children taken away from them. So we don't have an accurate count of how many students in this community are actually experiencing homelessness. So the problem is greater than we actually think it is. So that relationship, building that relationship, speaking with these families, what can we do to help assist you? Because it's a lot of those students that aren't getting the supports they need and face way more barriers in their lives to succeeding in schools than someone with safe and stable housing. So So really engaging our communities to talk about what are the issues that you face, and working with them, I think is important.
Okay, but at the board level, it sounds like just sending a policy around an achievement gap would be like one example.
Absolutely, but I mean, sorry, I should have finished that thought. Working with them to set those policies. So when you're looking at the achievement gap, not just sitting at the board level and going, well, I see a gap. I'm just going to take a shot that we should fix it. Like, let's actually bring in all the stakeholders that these policies influence and bring them to the table. So the students and the families and the educators, so that we have people who are actually experiencing what this looks like there at the table making decisions. And it is usually decisions like that when you have all the stakeholders involved. It's decisions like that that tend to be the most effective. So are we doing that at the board level? And that's something that obviously as a board member you would be able to influence.
Okay. Andy, do you need to rephrase
okay.
questioning?
Yeah.
We started with
start
talking
with?
about the achievement gap for students of color and like what the board, board
board's
member's
role.
role is in that.
I think that's it's an area that we are exploring and working as the board. I'm no expert in this. Am working to understand it better. I think some things that we have to ask is allow for naive questions, I guess, like what am I doing? Because I'm oftentimes you're not necessarily trying to be offensive, you're just trying to learn the question and how to ask. And I think sometimes we're getting too political with those questions, and it makes it hard to ask. And I will never understand what it's like to be someone in the achievement gap, a person of color. Like I never will. It'll never be on my radar. But I want to be able to ask. But sometimes it does make you nervous to ask because you're not trying to. You're trying to reach out and you're trying to help. I think at a board level, really what we can do and what we started to do, the last few years the board's held and. It's just one night. I know it's not the earth-shattering, but Latino Community Night. And we've had over 250 families each night come to those. We have interpreters. We provide daycare. So we're doing those things to get the parents into this. We even are offering meals. So we can sit and ask a question. I mean, one of my favorite stories was this last year. I sat down, there was a group of people, and their biggest frustration was they didn't know how to use the app for the bus. So we have an app on the bus, and I don't even know how to use the app. So, I'm like, hold still, ran and grabbed the transportation director and go, how do we help them? They just want to know where their students are at and if they got on the bus. And sometimes, I know that seems minor, but that's a huge step that the district can do to help feel that connection. And that's an area where I feel I can help. I maybe am still learning the broader issues and understanding that on a daily basis. And it's going to take time. It truly does. So that's what I think we can continue to do is reach out, like Shimiko was saying, to those groups, understand, and knowing that we're not going to fix it overnight. But if we can fix one little thing to make parents' life and students' life a little bit easier, that's where I really see the board can have a major role. It's one little step. Me figuring out how to use the app was not earth-shattering, but now we have a group of people that understand that app and they know where their students are, especially in today's day and age with safety.
Well, you brought up communication as a thing.
Yeah.
So, we're parents in the district, we get our emails from from our schools, and that's adequate for me. But I'm curious about the communication aspect of board positions. Like what I don't hear from the board as a parent. Is there a place for the board to communicate to the community about things that you're doing?
Yeah, no, we are, and we struggled with that the four previous years. In the last 2 years since I became chair, we've held 4 community forums each year where the focus was about a specific topic. For example, last year there was one specifically on suicide. There was one on even the new boundaries, where we got to listen to the community on boundaries. We had a couple hundred people there. You just really get to listen. One was what the new elementary school is going to look like, right? What people care about, what drive there. At the school board level, I find it difficult to communicate with everyone's time. And so we have to bring in topics, and I call them low-hanging fruit, but what's going to drive emotion. a $300 million budget does not drive anyone's emotion, and no one comes and testifies in front of us. But if we want to change a name of a school, we'll have the room full.
Yeah.
Right? So okay, so as a school board member, you take back, okay, so we think we have to go back and check ourselves sometimes, what we think is important communication and what's not. And, you know, I see the board's role is to do that, be out in front, but at the end of the day, the superintendent's the leader of the district, and we have the expectations, and I like to see the superintendent out there a lot more because they're in it day to day. We're volunteers. You know, I'm putting about maybe 5 to 10 hours a week. As chair, you may put as much as 15 hours a week into this. And so with 36 schools and that, I think we don't have enough consistent communication across. So one elementary school does it this way, X school does it this way, maybe a lower poverty school does it this way, and we're thinking everyone has email, but they may not. You know, so we've kind of gone away from the print newsletter, but I know 7 years ago, that print newsletter, I used a lot of it, and I get the benefits of electronics, but we also got to make sure we're getting that communication out.
Yeah, I mean, there's gotta be a financial component to printing that many.
Yeah, so you don't do everyone, but you know, we could have signups. Who would like a preferred printed copy?
Right.
You know, there's little things we can do, or as simple as help them set up an email. Maybe they don't know how to do it. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but that was a big concern for me when we switched to the iPad, was that everyone's going to have access at home, even if their family couldn't afford internet.
Yeah.
And, you know, that may be the barrier that's holding it up for a lot of people on the communication side.
So communication role with the board's role in communicating with the community.
I think incredibly important. I mean, you're representing the community. I think to make the decisions, you need to have community engagement. It's not just between the board and the schools. It's not just between the board and the students and the educators and their families. I mean, educating our youth is a community issue. Like, that is something that our entire community should be involved in, the education and welfare of all of our youth. So keeping communication going. Of course, there's challenges. They've tried different ways. They're improving, but I think taking more steps to make the board more accessible. Because, like you, I mean, I'm a parent as well in the district, and I don't get that engagement or that communication piece as much as I would like. So, you know, let's talk to parents. Let's talk to community members, community organizations. If our community doesn't know the issue that our students are facing, it's really hard for them to understand the issues like with the lack of funding that is going on in our schools. So say like the Student Success Act, if you aren't actively involved in keeping up with what's going on in our schools, it tends to be that that you don't really care if the Student Success, why can't I say success?
That's okay.
Success Act passes or fails. Even though it's one of the most critical things in this legislative session, so I think before we even hit a major point like this, where it's like, no, now you need to start really caring that this is important in our schools. Like, let's be proactive about this. Let's keep the community engaged so that when we do have problems going on in our schools or issues that we need to solve, that our community knows about it. So community organizations can step up, businesses, individuals. I really believe that every single person in our community has something to contribute to the education and success of our youth. And that all funnels straight into our public schools. That's a place that we can be the connector for all of these various groups and people. So the communication piece is the linchpin in that. I mean, it's what holds everything together. So that everybody can stay connected to what's going on.
Nicole, to me, the biggest barrier is about 75% of our community do no longer have students in education. Mm-hmm. So it's really easy to talk to the 20%. It's really hard to outreach to that 75%. Because why do they care? Why is it important? It's difficult to add, especially when we have a community with high retirees like we have in Central Oregon, because they're like, I'm done with school, I've moved on, why should I worry about that anymore? You know, and they oftentimes just look at their tax bill. That's their 1 year connection with schools is about November 15th, right?
Yeah.
And you see 5 bonds on there and go, geez, we're paying a lot for the schools. In reality, they don't realize the investment that has the schools have shaped this community quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like fortunately the voters have gone, the right way.
Yeah.
Along that. So, I mean, you mentioned the Student Success Act. I'm just curious, Andy, are you in support of the Student Success Act?
It's hard to say.
I've been supportive of fully funding schools this whole time, this last year. I'm still trying to figure out what version we're on in the Student Success Act, because I've seen 3 different ones in the last 3 days, so I'm trying to follow it, because originally the text I saw but was printed different yesterday. So I hope that I am supportive for the most part. I still would like to see the final version and what that looks like. I mean, I think because I read some things in there that part of it is there's still a lot of rules to be decided, meaning is ODE going to be set in our schools, Oregon Department of Education, excuse me, or does the Benton Pine School Board get to set the goals? If it's all going to ODE, I'm going to be probably a little less supportive, because I'm much more of a local control at the school level guy, because what's good for Benton Pine may not be good for Prineville, Crook County schools. So, I mean, I guess in theory, yes, very supportive, still waiting to see the final version.
Okay. Fair enough. We have some, the hot button issues. Chris, do you want to? That we've touched on in the other
I was even
ones.
stuck with this.
Well, I want to, you got to talk. You can't make me talk.
Not a talker. Well, we'll do the bullying then.
Bullying, yep.
So bullying continues to be a major issue in schools. How do you guys see the board taking a role in that? And whomever, well, you've started most of them, so we're going to let you go.
Okay, repeat your question.
Sure, it's bullying continues to be a major issue in school districts.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the board taking a role in that?
Well, I mean, we set these goals, and we really study the data and what we know. I mean, not just with with quantitative data. Qualitatively, we know that that bullying is an issue. We hear it from students, we hear it from educators, we hear it from families, so as a board, it's being firm that we need to put additional focus on it. There's a variety of ways you can go about it. As a school counselor, bullying was one of the top things that I focused on. And the way that and this goes into operation, the way that I would focus on it would be through various interventions. So you would do, there would be prevention and intervention. So personally, I very much, a lot of my work was steeped into crisis intervention. It's happening right now, what do I do? We're in crisis response. But beyond that, I wanted to reduce the amount of crisis interventions that I was working on, because that was such a large part of my job, and it shouldn't have been. So I was working on prevention at that point. And that's something at the school board level that we can start, that you can work on. What are we doing in changing the climate of our schools so that we're being proactive about prevention of bullying? So that goes back to that goes back to creating the culture of care, making sure that students know that they're cared for and that they're valued, that they're being that schools are being inclusive, that we're introducing concepts of a social emotional learning to each student so that they know how to do conflict resolution, and they know how to work with one another and how to resolve conflicts. So that goes into, so that's in the proactive prevention side of things. And then I'd be really curious to know what actually happens with the district and individual schools about how they do crisis intervention. I know how they do it in, or on a rough level, how they do it in the policies in like my kid's individual school, but I don't know, is there a district-wide crisis intervention policy? And once you go down that path, I'd be very curious to learn, what are the because it really ties into discipline. What are the discipline practices? I'm very much interested in restorative justice practices and providing wraparound services to students that are involved in these instances, so that we're not just being punitive. You did something bad, now we're going to punish you for it. But usually when a student is involved in these things, there's much deeper issues at play. So being able as a school to provide those wraparound services and providing the personnel that are trained to provide the support services necessary to help that student not repeat those actions. And then I'll go back to the prevention side of things. One of the things that I did at the elementary school that I worked in that was really effective because we had a high instances of bullying cases is working on bystander training, and so this was at the elementary level, and that was wonderful because the students had really framed in their mind that there was only two people involved in a bullying. There was the bully and the person who was being bullied, and so training them that actually the whole school is involved in a bullying instance. There's the person who's bullying, there's a person that's being bullied, and then there's the bystanders. So each one of us plays a role in anti-bullying, and that helped in giving them the tools to say, okay, so I see this happening to you. How do I advocate for you and your safety, and how do I tell you that I need you to stop, and how do I stand up for one another? And that made a huge impact. So I mean, it's things like this that we can introduce. I mean, obviously it goes back into the operational side of things, but I think, and it goes way back to your first question where you're talking about like, when you set a goal, like how do you know you can get there? So I think knowing these sort of things, when you set a goal to say, you know, there are so many things that we can do to make an impact. These are some ideas. These are ways, these are ways that we can be innovative, or these are ways that we can tackle it and setting that goals and knowing that they're achievable. Reducing bullying is absolutely achievable. So I'm really excited to see what's going on around in the district as far as prevention and intervention and getting my hands in there.
Shimiko kind of hit it all. I mean, I think us accepting more restorative justice practices has been, Julie Craig has been critical in this. She brings this up almost every meeting. We're probably not getting there fast enough. When you have 16, 17 meetings a year, it feels like it, sometimes the hard part with government, it goes too slow when you want it to go faster. Only other thing I would add, and I support what all of Shimiko said, I think she's right on there, but I would we need to sometimes add the student voice to this a little bit, bring the students in and talk to them, because I think there's so many versions of bullying now. I go back to the old way, there's the kid always in the corner eating lunch. I don't ever recall doing this, but the typical bullying thinking that I think is a young, older, middle-aged parent, whatever I am, but that I go back to my old ways to get back to my first quote, we're all experts in education because we went through it, it's like, oh, just toughen up. I find myself having to check myself with my own students at home with that sometimes, like, oh, you'll be fine, get over it, So I think it's learning and bringing that student's voice to the table is something that we're lacking, I think, on this bullying thing. We all talk about it, we hear the one or two issues, but we're not hearing about the mass issues, the day-to-day stuff, in my view, that we need to be doing better job at.
I'm trying
to stay on your timetable.
We're getting close to the end. There are a couple things that that we definitely wanted to touch on.
Cool.
One is that, and I hope we just, I guess this is maybe a yes or no sort of thing, that a number of school student councils and then the Bend Education Association have adopted climate change resolutions within their own organizations and hoped to bring it to the board for your support or the board's support. So I'm just curious, would you be in support of signing that resolution as a board?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm totally open to looking at it. I mean, I haven't seen their resolution. Someone that deals with water every day. There's lots of changes, going on. Conservation's key. It's the big piece of our company trying to help people produce and use less water, but produce, good crops. So I'm totally open to looking at it. This is the first time I've heard about it. I didn't realize BEA had it, and no one's brought it to at least me as chair and asked for it to be on the agenda item, but we'd definitely look at adding it and allowing the discussion to happen amongst it.
Yeah, I think the last I heard, maybe that they wanted to, when the new board was on, then
great.
they would think that, as opposed to doing it now when some people are just gonna be like, sure. And the other one is just gun violence in schools, and this is such a meaty topic, but some folks we have interviewed have been in support of things as far off as arming teachers. So I guess I just like to know where you stand in terms of how we're doing in the district as far as preventing incidents. There was some threats last year. There's been some movement in terms of increased security that we are aware of, but where do you stand as far as, can we do more, are we doing enough, and should we arm teachers?
So I'll take a stab at this first if you're okay with it. So this is not as black and white to me as it is for some people. And I've worked with Caroline on doing more gun education in the schools, on educating parents on locking up your guns, making sure they're away. As a kid, all my parents' guns were in the closet and they were not locked up, right? I mean, oftentimes many of the students I went to school, I grew up in Klamath Falls, so let me preference, it wasn't like downtown Portland. Kids would go hunting before school. My senior year, and this, let me tell you why it's great for me, and I have a hard time. My senior year, 2 days before my graduation, law enforcement stopped a student that was planning to attack graduation, and I was one of the 5 targets. I was the redheaded troll. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but that he would take active practice range on, and nothing's worse than having the sheriff come visit you and your family 2 days before that. I think we're on the right path for security measures. I'm not excited about arming teachers. That doesn't appeal to me. I think what we're doing at the district right now is forcing, that's the wrong term, having the public have 1 or 2 entries. That's the goal with a lot of this right now. It's not to keep people in or contained. It's really to know who's coming in and out of our schools. And under our new Raptor program, we're able to do, so you bring in your ID now. And you have to go through, and it quickly does a background check. And if there's someone there that doesn't, in a background check meaning, is it a sexual predator? Is it someone that can't be on school ground? We stop them right there. And they're not even getting past those front vestibules. So I think we can do more with education on locking up your guns, making sure they're secured. Oregon Hunters Association has a great program, and Mothers Demand Action have a great program. We really should look at 2 groups that you wouldn't see typically on the same page. Probably has a much different message, and I think that's where the board can bring those groups together. I don't think it solely falls on the board to be pushing that every day. I think we can do a lot of things to help further along the message and make sure it's getting out there. So I don't know if I answered all your question. I jumped around a lot there.
I think you covered it.
Okay,
I kind of
good.
wanted to see where you felt about about the arming teachers and then security in general in schools.
I think the schools have been doing a good job with increasing security measures. I've been appreciating them sort of chipping away at that. No, definitely let's not arm our teachers. I really would advocate against that. I think there's simple things that we can do as a community, not just for our schools, but our entire community. Educating families to lock up their guns. I definitely want to keep pushing for gun reform. I think that's important. Obviously, that's a very contentious issue. That's something that I do in my work as a pastor and with my faith community. It is an issue, and parents have deep concerns about the safety of their kids, especially regarding access to guns. And it's an important topic to stay abreast on.
We have yet one more divisive issue, and then I'm
Great.
gonna let you guys wrap up,
Okay.
because we brought this to the other folks. The school-based health centers at this point, and this is my understanding, is that it's been the board's direction not to offer contraception at those centers. And meanwhile, I don't think it's lost on students that there's daycare centers at those schools. So I'm curious if you would support offering contraception at the school-based health centers, and if that would be something you would actually execute upon as a board member.
Yeah, so, oh gosh, sorry, can I
You're-
go first?
yeah.
Sorry.
I asked last time, so you're
Okay.
good.
So I worked at the high school level. This was an issue that we faced. I worked in a deeply Catholic community, where a large population of the students come from Catholic families. So contraception was not something that the community was excited about at all. We had a community-based healthcare center nurse right there on campus, and she was not allowed to dispense contraception. From a counselor perspective, walking these students through high school, teen pregnancy definitely was an issue. So it was really frustrating to have a student get pregnant, but then there was limited pathways back towards graduation or returning back to school. And we weren't allowed to educate them about birth control. We weren't allowed to dispense it. And all the studies showed that if we did those two things, we could keep more students in school. We would reduce STDs. We would reduce teen pregnancy.